Just imagine, during the chaos and destruction of war, enemies laying down their arms. Instead of exchanging gunfire, they're exchanging smiles. That's exactly what happened not once, not twice, but 4 recorded times in history. In today's video, we'll explore the times when battlefields became grounds of peace, even if briefly. From the trenches of World War I to the dense jungles of Vietnam, we'll explore the times when soldiers chose humanity over hostility. These extraordinary truces, although they were often spontaneous and unofficial, gave us a rare insight into the power of empathy, even in the harshest conditions. Stick with us to uncover these unique stories where the spirit of friendship and hope triumphed over the despair of war. Even during conflict, there's still a universal longing for peace. Let's start with the thick jungles and turbulent skies of Vietnam, with a war marked by guerrilla tactics and ideological clashes. But during this challenging time, a brief yet deep moment of peace highlighted the shared humanity of those caught in the conflict. It was a poignant contrast to the otherwise relentless pace of war. The Tet Offensive of 1968 was one of the largest military campaigns during the Vietnam War. However, it was during this vicious campaign that a complex and unexpected dynamic unfolded. There were moments of fleeting peace, often aligned with significant cultural celebrations, like Tet, also known as Vietnamese New Year. These moments offered a clear contrast to the ongoing brutality of the Vietnam War. Traditionally, the Tet Truce represented a ceasefire, which both sides honored for the Tet holiday. Before the bloody breakout of the Tet Offensive, they made separate announcements of unilateral truces. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam declared a ceasefire from January 27 to February 3, 1963. Likewise, the Viet Cong made a similar announcement. Originally, the US and the Republic of Vietnam planned a 48-hour ceasefire. However, soon enough, they shortened it to only 36 hours, starting on the evening of January 30th. Both sides were still cautious of each other, and they recognized the persistent tensions and distrust that were part of the conflict. However, the peaceful goals of the Tet Truce were shattered when the Libertarian Army of South Vietnam launched attacks in areas excluded from the ceasefire. Soon after this development, the Republic of Vietnam's president formally cancelled the truce across South Vietnam. US and Army of Republic Vietnam forces were soon on full alert. Just a day later, on January 31st, the Tet Offensive began. What was initially a moment of peace suddenly transformed into a major escalation of the conflict. It also shifted public perception, particularly in the United States, which changed the course of the war and the level of public support. Next, we head to the African continent. In the late 1960s, the Nigerian Civil War raged on. But in 1969, a remarkable moment unfolded that blended the worlds of football and military conflict. The extraordinary moment happened when Pele, the Brazilian football legend, and his club Santos arrived in the country for a match. The story goes that their presence brought a temporary ceasefire. According to the story, for 48 hours, the guns fell silent. Santos played against Nigeria's national team, the Super Eagles, in Lagos, ending in a 2-2 draw. As always, Pele shone in the match, scoring both goals for his team. Despite the nation being in the grip of war, the crowd found a moment of joy in the match. They cheered and gave Pele a standing ovation. However, there's more to this tale. Conflicting accounts and thorough research by journalists suggest that the ceasefire might actually be more myth than reality. Contemporary newspaper reports from the time don't mention a ceasefire. Similarly, Pele's autobiographies present different takes on the situation. In one version, he claims that the Nigerians simply ensured the opposing Biafrans wouldn't invade Lagos during their stay, but in another account, Pele adopted the more romanticized version of the story. So, it appears that this event is shrouded in mystery, although one thing remains clear: the impact Pele and his game had on the Nigerian people, even in the darkest times. But there are far better documented times of peace during war. In the winter of 1944, during the ferocious Battle of the Bulge, there was a surprising tale of humanity and compassion. It defied the brutal realities of World War II. This incredible incident happened in a small cottage near the German-Belgian border. Here, Elizabeth Vinknen and her young son, Fritz, were seeking refuge from the war's chaos. On a bitterly cold Christmas Eve, their peace was interrupted by a knock on the door. Elizabeth cautiously opened it. only to discover 3 American soldiers, with 1 seriously wounded. Despite the clear danger, as helping the enemy could lead to execution, Elizabeth welcomed the men, offering shelter and warmth. But that wasn't all. As they settled in, there came another knock on the door. This time, it was 4 German soldiers at the doorstep who were looking for some shelter from the biting cold. Elizabeth now faced a difficult situation, as she now had enemies under the same roof. Despite this, she bravely declared her home a sanctuary of peace on this sacred night. And inside that small cottage, an amazing scene unfolded. The American and German soldiers agreed to a truce, leaving their weapons outside. Soldiers from opposing sides, who just a few moments before were engaged in deadly conflict, now shared a Christmas meal. A German soldier with medical training tended to the wounded American. They overcame the language barriers with a mix of French and goodwill, as they all embraced a fleeting moment of peace. Even the next morning, the sense of brotherhood continued among these young men. When it was time to leave, the German soldiers helped the Americans to find their way back. This incredible act of humanity during the horrors of war left a deep impact on all those who were there. And yet, 30 years earlier, in 1914, the most famous example of peace during the war occurred, the Christmas Truce. This remarkable ceasefire was not an official order from the High Command, but a spontaneous act of goodwill among enemies. Just imagine, it's Christmas Eve in the trench-strewn landscape of World War I's Western Front. The usual horrific sounds of war have subsided. In their place, soldiers heard a different sound, voices singing carols from the trenches. The British heard Stille Nacht drifting across from the German lines, and they responded with English carols. Eventually, both sides emerged from their trenches and met in no man's land. It was a surreal sight, with enemies standing together, exchanging seasonal greetings and gifts of cigarettes, plum puddings, and other small tokens. But this was more than simply exchanging gifts. It was a moment of shared humanity. Soldiers weary from battle seized this pause to bury their dead comrades. Previously, their bodies had lain for weeks in the frozen wastelands between the trenches. They held joint services, respecting the fallen regardless of which side they had fought for. One of the most iconic images of this truce was soldiers playing football in no man's land. They kicked about makeshift footballs, which were usually a bundle of rags or a stuffed sack, in friendly matches between opposing forces. For a brief moment, they forget the war, which was replaced by laughter and friendship. Unfortunately, the Christmas truce wasn't universal among forces on the Western Front. In some areas, the fighting continued, but where the truce did happen, it was a powerful example of the human spirit's resilience and the desire for peace, even amid horror. As dawn broke on December 26th, soldiers returned to their trenches, and the war resumed its grim hold. But the memory of that Christmas truce remained as a brief moment where the spirit of the season overcame the devastation of war. There have also been other times when, during other wars, humanity triumphed over hostility, although they're not as well documented. For example, in 1950, Chinese and United Nations troops were locked in a fierce combat during the Korean War. But during this bloody war, heartwarming stories emerged of Chinese medics treating wounded American soldiers. They'd set aside their differences to survive the harsh winter. Likewise, there were reports of soldiers momentarily ceasing fire during Christmas to mark the holiday season. Fast forward to 1994, and in the Bosnian War's dark landscape, Christmas once again shone a light of peace. Bosnian, Croat, and Bosniak forces put down their arms to celebrate Christmas, forgetting their strife in the joy of the festive period. Rewind to the American Civil War. It's Christmas yet again, and there's an air of quiet across the battlefields. Soldiers on both sides agree to a brief truce. They exchanged greetings, sang carols, and shared food. Even during fierce division, there's a longing for peace and unity. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur, respect for other religious festivals brought temporary pauses in the fighting. Israeli and Arab forces allowed for humanitarian gestures during Yom Kippur and Ramadan. Each side allowed the other to collect the wounded and exchange prisoners. They honored the other's faith during the conflict. Even during the grimness of war, we've seen moments where the human spirit went beyond conflict, forging islands of peace in the seas of turmoil. From the legendary 1914 Christmas truce to the unexpected acts of kindness in the Korean War and beyond, these stories remind us of the enduring capacity for empathy and solidarity. Such moments, often unplanned and driven by the soldiers themselves, contrast the lonely narrative of war. There's clearly a universal wish for peace and connection across battle lines.